The laddu is synonymous with the great temple complex of Tirumala-Tirupati. It's hard to imagine a visit to the hill without at some point queuing up to get a laddu. The offering and consumption of such prasadam, believed to embody both human devotion and divine grace, is perhaps one of Hinduism's most common practices today. But the evolution of Prasadam in Tirupati took some interesting detours: sectarian competition, wars between Hindu rulers, and evolving trade. In the process, Tirupati's Prasadam transformed from a simple gruel of ghee and rice to a savoury pongal accompanied by vegetable curries, and finally to the sweet, heavy laddu. For at least the last 2000 years, the Venkata Hill has marked the frontier of the Tamil and Telugu cultural zones. In the hill's vast history, it's relatively recently, only around the 9th to 10th century CE, that it became sacred to Vishnu as Venkateshwara, literally Lord of Venkata Hill. The earliest mentions of the god are from Tiruchanur, once a Brahmin-ruled village in present-day Tirupati, at the foot of the mist-wreathed hill. The only offerings made to Venkateshwara at the time were ablutions of water and lamps filled with pungent sheep's ghee. However, things began to change with the rise of Chola power further south in the Kaveri floodplain. From the 11th century, the Cholas unleashed conquests across southern India and lavished Tamil temples with captured war loot, leading to innovations in ritual practices such as the procession of bronze idols and the institution of calendrical festivals. The dynasty's imperial temples, named after their kings, were the prime beneficiaries, but existing local shrines also received a cut, usually from local notables or military officers who worked for the Cholas, and Tirumala was no exception. By the early 11th century, temple inscriptions first mention its processional bronzes and a ritual calendar of just 7 days. So how did the temple grow to its current status with offerings and rituals and processions all around the year? Interestingly, the first moves in this direction were due to a decline in Chola power in the 12th century. During this time, a wealthy class of landlords, while undermining the Chola state, lavished donations on local shrines. And gradually, Venkateshwara acquired lands in various villages and a modest treasury of gold and jewels. He began to receive offerings of rice, ghee and curd. As money flowed, innovative religious movements such as the Sri Vaishnava order opened temple activities to new groups of people. Tirumala was a particular success story for the Sri Vaishnava Brahmins, who moved there and formed an alliance with a local clan of shepherds turned warlords called the Yadavarayar. These Tamil and Telugu speaking Yadavas shouldn't be confused with North Indian Yadavs. Now, these Yadavarayar lavished Venkateshwara with new offerings: honey, beetle, vegetable sambar, turmeric, sugar and sandalwood. They even built a palace in Tirumala where they boasted of their conquests. By the 13th century, Venkateshwara's shrine was well off but still pretty modest by Tamil standards. But a tremendous geopolitical change would soon transform the fortunes of Tirumala. In the early 1300s, most of South India's regional kingdoms collapsed under the onslaught of the Delhi Sultanate. This allowed new trans-regional polities to develop: the Bahmani Sultanate in the northern Deccan and the Vijayanagara Empire in the deep south. Now, Vijayanagara ruled over vast, diverse cultural zones: Kannada, Telugu and Tamil, each with its own proud traditions. To unify these regions, major regional gods were given new temples in the Vijayanagara city. Additionally, Vijayanagara strategically patronized older local shrines. For example, as we talked about here, the Chenchu Adivasis of the Eastern Ghats came to believe that they were in-laws of the popular Vijayanagara god Narasimha, thanks to Vijayanagara temple construction in Chenchu lands. Similarly, Venkateshwara was deemed suitable for Vijayanagara's imperial designs. As we talked about earlier, the god's Venkata Hill straddled the Telugu and Tamil regions. Vijayanagara's warrior class spoke mostly Telugu, and their relationship with Tamil elites was turbulent, as we talked about here. Now, devotion to Venkateshwara gave both groups a common cause. And so, from the 1400s to the early 1600s, the temple of Venkateshwara rapidly became the richest temple in all of South India. From 1510 to 1570, Vijayanagara's royalty and courtiers lavished the god with 8,05,653 gold coins, along with vast swathes of land and hundreds of cows and bulls. Some Vijayanagara emperors seemed to believe that the god assisted them in war. Krishnaraya of Vijayanagara, who ruled from 1509 to 1529, for example, visited the temple after devastating the territory of his rival Prataparudra, the Hindu king of Odisha. Gifts to the temple were meant to be invested, and the accrued interest was spent on offerings. The most important offering was a luxuriant pongal based on the cuisine of Tirumala Sri Vaishnava Brahmins: rice and lentils cooked with generous amounts of ghee and pepper. Alongside these offerings, Tirumala's ritual calendar ballooned with multiple services not only for the god in the main temple but also for bronze idols of Venkateshwara, his consorts and other forms of Vishnu. Every day, every year came to be filled with more and more ritual services. The temple complex transformed into a warren of kitchens, treasuries, tanks, shrines and imposing gateways. This was the heyday of Tirumala when it took on the form that it retains today. The Vijayanagara court was Tirumala's primary patron, but it wasn't the only patron. In fact, the temple's officials, mostly Brahmins, also considered it an investment destination and donated both land and gold. In the 1500s, 43% of the temple's 115 villages were gifted to it by various accountants, vendors, officers and scholars. The temple treasury office, the Sri Bhandaram, handled these gifts and investments as well as the making and offering of prasadam. But surprisingly, barely any of this prasadam was distributed freely to pilgrims. Instead, according to Dr. Timmappa Valmiki, a historian of Tirumala, prasadam was mostly given to temple donors and Brahmins. After the death of the donors, the food went to various Sri Vaishnava institutions. In some cases, donors obtained permission from the temple to sell prasadam to pilgrims for cash. This was perhaps the beginning of Tirumala's pilgrim prasadam tradition. With the final end of Vijayanagara power in the 17th century, Tirumala lost some of its preeminence, but not all. Though no longer a major political centre, it still received pilgrims. Various early modern Nawabs profited from taxing them. It was only under British rule in the 20th century that substantial numbers of North Indian pilgrims began arriving in Tirumala, leading to the god being named Balaji and introducing the practice of laddu making. In fact, it was most likely in the 1940s that laddus became the primary prasadam of Venkateshwara. This primacy has sparked considerable furor in the past week. Following claims that Tirumala laddus were cooked with animal fat, some politicians have melodramatically proclaimed this to be a stain on the Hindu race, and social media has erupted in vitriol. But Venkateshwara's prasadam is much more than just a laddu. It opens a window into centuries of cultural and religious evolution in South India and shows how the Tirumala site developed through a confluence of imperial interests and Brahmin cultures. When it first rose to eminence, Tirumala was an elite enterprise explaining this focus on ritual purity, but in the centuries that followed, its appeal has spread to many sections of society, many kinds of devotees, many cultures and many diets. The focus on ritual purity in the supposed prasadam scam is a political gimmick, exploiting sentiments through a supposed affront to the god. But Tirumala's history is much vaster than short-sighted communalism. The Venkata Hill will endure, as it always has. I'm sure this is a controversial opinion, so if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media, and you can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.